early, so I wanted to start by asking about your influences. In your bio, you describe having a wide range of visual influences. So I was curious about what makes you interested in something visually and how you bring that into your process.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I do have quite a wide range of influences. Yeah, so I can only describe it as being just everything. Like I'm kind of a glutton for just media and especially, art, but also music. To the point where it's kind of inconvenient because, I'm like, oh, I gotta have that book. I gotta look at that. I gotta look at that. And I really like going to thrift stores and antique stores and looking at everything because I find that it's kind of like this time capsule, and it has like things from all over, from all sorts of like high art, low art. I can only describe it as like a pastiche that just like junk, more and more junk. What visual influences and also like sonic influences, are playing around in my mind. But yeah, it's kind of never ending. And what I like things that are, simple and minimal and are focused on having like a contained grace, but I also really like things that are bombastic and absurd and gaudy and over the top. All the whole spectrum is of interest to me. But in general, I tend towards that which is very, over the top. But I like things to have kind of this sense of grace, even though it seems unlikely to find it within something so, things that might be like really kitschy at first, or, things that might not show a large degree of technical skill. I started really exploring visual art when I was younger with outsider artists. I loved how they would take things that were seemingly mundane, like, magazine clippings and cardboard that they found on the street and just painted over and whatnot, and would, with whatever, whatever skills they had, make work of just amazing beauty. So really anything, but to be more specific, I love art of the High Renaissance and the Byzantine era. I mean, I hesitate to name specifics because it could go on and on. I love everything, and I'm so hungry to just see everything. I also really like record covers a lot. I love pulp, pulp novels, like cheap paperbacks. I find have just amazing art, fantasy novels, romance novels. I have like one over there that just has like the most amazing, just unabashedly over the top, sublime, like rapturous art. And I think it's just so great to see the connection between like stuff you could get for like $1 at a used thrift store and like an altarpiece which was supposed to evoke, like kneeling and crying and shaking. So anything that's intense, over the top, is like really earnest and raw. I like.
That's so interesting. And so I find it really fascinating that you take from all these, or are inspired by so many different sort of visual languages and sources, but at the same time, you've articulated such a distinctive like visual language in yourself. It's very sure to me. And so I'm wondering about that translation, like how you take that in and then how you create this world in your paintings.
Yeah, so that's kind of an unusual thing for me. A lot of I ideas I have will just appear in my head, like fully formed, and the titles will also appear. Like I'll be on the bus and then I'll just like think of it. And yeah, so I usually sit with the idea for a while, and I'll have to do some detective work and find out what compelled me to make, what to think of such a thing and to want to make such a thing. And it's interesting because, I'm like not consciously trying to, and not generally, sometimes I'll think of the subject and think of, well, how can I paint something about this? It interests me, but generally it's, yeah, they just appear in my head. Then I have to go back and do some, self-exploration and be like, okay, what have I consumed? Like, what media have I consumed? What have I experienced and thought about to make me to, just generate this idea in my subconscious, and then it appears. And then it will be like, okay, that figure reminds me a lot of this this bad guy from a manga I was just reading, or oh, I probably want to paint this because I've been thinking a lot about this thing going on. Yeah, so it's a lot like I'm just kind of moving through life, exploring, reading, looking at things, and then they all kind of like, they're kind of like gestating, and then they appear. It's a little jarring to me because I'll be like going on with my day and I'll be like, here you go, like paint this. But yeah, that's part of the process, and just having that idea, sitting with it, thinking about it, and then I'll usually I won't paint it right away. I will sit with it for months or years at a time, and by the time I actually get around to putting it on, paper or canvas, the framework is still there, but it's quite different from the original iteration. It's more conscious and deliberate, but yeah, it's kind of like a merging of like, what has influenced my subconscious and what I have consciously decided to paint. So yeah, it's interesting. I understand it's a bit unusual, but yeah.
Yeah, and how do this is a very simple question, but how did you learn how to paint? Because your degrees are in communications and art history, so it wasn't a BFA, MFA process. So I'm curious about that. Like, is it something you were doing from a young age, or did you come at it during school?
Yeah, so I started drawing when I was quite young. I started like trying to copy Pokemon. And I was just drawing for a long time. And then when I was like 12, 13, I started using watercolors. And then it was only like 3 or 4 years ago, I started using acrylics, which I use now. And luckily, since I'd already been drawing, I was able to translate, the principles I knew from that into acrylics. But yeah, it was interesting because I'd been looking at art and paintings for so long before that, but I only really was compelled to paint in a more serious capacity after after like looking at a lot of Black artists and being like, oh wait, I can paint, like I can do that. And it was funny because after I decided to start painting, I discovered like my school, UW, had like all these Jacob Lawrence paintings, and I like found them in like this, I was studying in a library, and I was just like, okay, maybe this is a sign. But yeah, it was, I think he like went there or something, I forgot. But yeah, so it was pretty, I guess, relatively recently where and it was too late at that point to like switch my major to like fine arts, which I never really was encouraged to pursue the arts. It was, like African parents, you gotta be a doctor or else. Oops. But yeah, so it was something I was tentatively like, oh, I'll just draw when I have time. And then it became quite a encompassing thing in my life.
That's amazing. And so, and the school, University of Washington, owns Jacob Lawrence's, is what you said, and you encountered them that way. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was quite magical. And I only, like, I'd been going to the library, and I only like happened to chance upon that hallway when I started painting. So it was very encouraging.
That's incredible. I also wanted to ask about your painting. I think that there's something generally like so freeing about imagination and imagining or speculating, and certainly in creating your own narratives, which I see
Absolutely.
a lot of in your work. And I read some things that you wrote, and you asked this question: what is it about the imagined that feels more real than real?
Mhm.
And I thought about that for a while, and I was wondering how, in the context of your work, you think of the real, how you approach that idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I like wrote about this thing. um, so I think what is real is, like what is real and what is absolutely factual seems like it would be the same, but I believe it is not. What is real is often defined as how we feel about something or what moves us, and it's fully, in my opinion, reliant on our perception. Things that we might call things, not real if we think they're false or think they're insignificant. Um, but yeah, I think it's something that can be felt through physical reality and then expressed through artifice. So I think, artifice myth has had such a long, enduring history of defining what is real and what has been real for many people. Um, oh, oh, okay. Oh, right. Okay. There's also a gallery in UW called the Jacob Lawrence Gallery. But anyway, yeah. So I like question if something is less real if no one wants to, depict it through, like record it in some way, whether it's trying to have a one-to-one record of that, or like like an accurate one, or express it through artifice. And so I think defining what is real is interesting to me. I also think of that there's like this Sylvester song. It's like, you make me feel mighty real. And I love that song because it puts so simply such a strange contradiction between like real as supposed to be definitive fact, like I am real, versus like feeling real is such an important of being real, or like, it's kind of cerebral and strange, but I think that song applies to so much for me personally. Like I feel real when something moves me and something causes me to feel something. Like it makes me aware of myself and the other party, whether it's a painting or book or something that is moving me and compelling me to like feel these things and be aware of these sensations. So yeah. So yeah, I in that song too, I think he felt so real that he had to make a song about it. And I think that that's a part of, like making things, like something feels so like solid, even though it might be immaterial, that you have to make something about it. And I've loved that. Like this has been like I really like myths and spiritual traditions and stories from all over, and I love how they have this just unabashed, like unapologetic sense of fantasy to them, and I think when something isn't trying to replicate reality, um, it almost, by virtue of it not trying to hypnotize you into thinking it's reality, it becomes more a part of your reality, and like it's kind of paradoxical. But like the paintings that are in Nada, they're all the same size. They're like 28 by 22, I think. And I like that size because it's like a movie poster. It's confrontational, as in for me at least, it takes up like that, like my torso and my head basically. But it's, so they're not big enough to be immersive, but they're not small enough where you have to get close and be intimate. And basically, like your periphery, you can see the comings and goings of whatever else is happening in the gallery or whatnot. So I like how confrontational uh, artifice is. It's like, okay, I'm not trying to make you think that this is reality, but I'm just fully imposing myself upon your reality. So I think it's interesting exploring like what is real that way. And I found myself to be like the most moved by um, works that are very fantastical and are aware of their own lack of naturalism. But then the feelings, the themes, whatever was explored in there seemed to impact me and hit me with so much more force than I think if they were trying to be as realistic as possible. I think the realm of fantasy is so great for providing an escape from all the endless stimulus and possibility of the real world, and being like, okay, we're gonna explore these three themes. It's totally a world of fantasy. It's animation. There's nothing reminiscent of the real world, on a surface level. But then since you have all these distractions kind of eliminated, you're able to just distill all the focus into these certain themes, which you might have encountered in the real world, but you weren't able to fully acknowledge and process because of everything else distracting from that. And I think that for me, I think that fascination really stemmed from like my upbringing was like my parents are immigrants from Ethiopia, and from a young age I was kind of told that I was very aware of my being American, but didn't really identify with being an American, because from what I was told, being an American was like, you got to work super, super hard, or else you're going to be nothing, and you're going to be screwed, basically. So being an American wasn't like something I identified with. It was just more like a job. So yeah, and there was also a lot of I felt like pretty foreign, even though I was born here and was raised here. I heard like my parents and my relatives kind of say things like these very broad statements about America that were pretty black and white, and I understand why, because when I'm sure, like, I've never immigrated anywhere, certainly not from like one place that was so different to the place I was going to, but I imagine that having this like eliminating nuance from how you understand the new place you're in and how you decisions and whatnot is probably a necessity, because you don't, because I certainly have had the luxury of just considering things, but when you're trying to establish yourself and assimilate, it's easier to be like, oh, this is how they do it in America. Like, Americans hate this, Americans love this, So I was raised to have this very black and white surface level understanding of being an American, and I wasn't really allowed to like watch TV or anything, so I couldn't, like, it was very rigid. But then I would go out and see all these contradictions, and I'd be like, oh my God, like, what's going on? This is so confusing. So it was just very confusing, living here and growing up, to the point where from a young age, I found fantasy so empowering, because you could, like, in fantasy, like, the evil's always vanquished, justice prevails. If there's a mystery, generally it is discovered. But even if it's not discovered, it's intentional. There's no sense of like, oh God, what is it? What is it? In fantasy, everything is deliberate. So it was very comforting for me from a very young age. And since I didn't have any, strong sense of identity in being an American, or being like Ethiopian American or anything, my sense of identity came from being able to like spin a story from the top of my head. And I became so comfortable from just like dreaming up stories, and I didn't really have much interest in myself for the most part, or like I didn't really have a sense of community or anything. So it was like fantasy was kind of gave me what I was lacking in a way. But yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, it's so, I love the way you talk about the, first of all, the scale of your works and the sort of relationship between reality and image. And this sort of like intentional slippage between fantasy and reality is, I think is a very interesting parallel with, you know, being diasporic and being sort of between identities, and that sort of perhaps sometimes feeling more one thing than the other, but also intentionally trying to assimilate according to your parents' instruction. It's such a precarious space that is sort of reflective of what you're saying with your paintings as well.
Yeah.
I was really taken with something else you said too. I mean, I think it would be helpful to think about even the themes that are inside of your paintings. One thing that I was interested in is the way you were sort of approaching atrocity as an ongoing historical phenomenon. You know, and it was so vivid to me, the imagery that you were talking about, you know, the idea of being on your phone and witnessing atrocity through your phone. And you write this quote, knowing it is a tendril of a monster that has existed for centuries and whose effect is so far reaching and sometimes seemingly invincible. I think that there's so much truth in that. And I was curious how you explore that, and, you know, even in these particular images or just in general, how you approach that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think I approach that by combating a feeling of powerlessness or helplessness or confusion by, you know, like making paintings in the first place or doing things in the first place. I was aware from a young age that, like, given that I'm like a woman and Black and, you know, the daughter of immigrants, like there are lots, there's like, I felt this from a very, very young age. I felt that like this strong presence of something that, like, basically institutional forces that didn't want me to like thrive and like be the best and whatever, to put it very lightly, and encountering, you know, in the very barest sense, encountering headlines that, one, like, you know, just because of my sense of empathy, even though it didn't directly allude to me or aspects of my identity that that like spoke of some sort of injustice, was jarring. But also, you know, when they kind of hit home and made me realize that, you know, my freedom, my power, my sense of power was not valued, and the opposite would like to be diminished by such strong, overwhelmingly strong forces that have had like this historical legacy. Like the way to, you know, combat that like horrible feeling, frankly horrible feeling, was to, out of spitefulness at first, but then like out of love for myself and for life, to be like, you know what, no, I'm not gonna let this get me down. No matter what's going on, I'm gonna have a good time. I'm gonna make my paintings, and that's putting it very lightly. So I think like just having this expression of life and being aware of, you know, what's going on, and not diminishing my like empathy and awareness for the purposes of comfort, not being tempted by denial, which is being able to be in a state of denial is something which I believe is varies greatly and reflects privileges people have, but, you know, not going down that road, and instead balancing awareness with like very intentional joy and you know, empowerment. I think I've had to, and, you know, not just me, I've had to be very intentional in how I feel like I'm powerful, and how I feel like, you know, like I'm on the top of the world, more or less, and painting does that for me. I think, like, you know, making anything is just such a powerful thing, and I think everyone should do it. I think like when you make anything, you're exploring like limitlessness, and you're challenging your ego and identity, and getting out of those bounds, just by virtue of externalizing something within yourself and realizing you could do that endlessly. You could just, even if it's just like a line. Everyone watching, if you don't draw, please just draw a line. It's so good, and it's like, yeah, it's very transcendent, to be able to make things. And I think like rapture, sublime, the transcending is something that I focus in my work a lot. I think yeah, and definitely the works were not especially the dogwood one. I don't know. But yeah, yeah, I think that if the atrocities aren't directly referenced, I think the act of painting itself and focusing on the sublime and transcendental, and seeing like what is enduring through the things that are rightfully should be given attention and care in the present, but are inevitably ephemeral. I don't know how I started that sentence. Yeah. Basically, just like remembering that the universe is big. If you believe in God, there's more out there, and like having the sense of scale and being able to hold together the two facts of what is going on right now is really important. What has been going on right now is really important, but also like, I'm gonna die one day, I'm gonna be part of the earth again, and all this, like having these two scales of time, the immediate and the eternal, held together, I think is really important. And I think my work definitely explores that. And I definitely think that my fascination with like the sublime and transcendental has come from lots of frustration observing the world around me, and also just like love for people, knowing what atrocities they can commit regardless. They've made so many beautiful, amazing things, and it seems like and when it seems like like people are divisive, or all the number of things that can make it feel like there's no what's the word? Well, okay, so like what I just think about how like the human inclination towards the spiritual and the fantastical is such a prevalent, pervasive thing throughout all peoples, all societies, all cultures, whatever, all time. It's very comforting. It's kind of like something to go back to when people seem to be very divisive, and it seems the hatred that I observe in certain groups and certain institutional forces seems so overwhelming, and so devastating. It's comforting to be like, okay, well, people are actually pretty similar in this way, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that, I mean, Simon just put a question in the chat, which I think is related to what you're saying, sort of this thinking of like fantasy as an antidote. And he was asking about how your works are, on the one hand, can seem quite melancholy, but on the other hand are humorous.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you about Toilet Rendezvous no longer means rest. So maybe that's a good way. Maybe we could talk about that and how you played with comedy and melancholy there.
Yeah. For me, comedy has been like my entire life has been like just a survival tactic, more or less. And my sense of humor is very imaginative. Like, I'll just think of random scenarios. My sister and I will think of like random scenarios and just like talk in weird voices and whatnot. And I think, I think there's something very, I think I've said this to someone recently, but I think playfulness is very serious, and playfulness is a form of reverence to me. And not just to me, like I am astounded again and again at when I read some like ancient myth or folktale or whatever, and like the sense of playfulness is so like it's overwhelming. Like it will start, I've read so many things where it's like, okay, yeah, there's this guy and he had bunny ears or something just so ridiculous, and it's like, how do people come up with that? Well, they have to maintain the sense of playfulness, and ultimately such silliness is often used to describe something that is serious. And I think the toilet Rendezvous painting does that. That one was, I got the idea from that when there was the fires in Brazil earlier this year, and there was only like the person in the middle and the fires. There wasn't like the fairies or anything, and they weren't on their phone and they were crying. And then I just sat with that for a while, and then I started painting it when there was like the West Coast fires, and it was like orange and smoky and like apocalyptic in Washington, where the fires weren't even that, relatively not as bad. And so it's like at some point you just like, I felt like I was just so bombarded with all these like looking at my phone, even briefly glancing at it, I'll see like the news headlines, and it would be like 3 like tragedies just stacked on top of each other. And I found myself like feeling jaded at sometimes, but then I would have this like explosion of emotion where I would just like cry it all out and just like pace around feeling so frustrated and angry and like helpless, and like what, like I was like, what am I gonna do about all this, even though I know it's not on me, but it's when you're perceiving it, it's almost like it feels very confrontational to me, at least. It's like, oh, look at all the stuff that's happening, what are you gonna do? So what I felt like was, is it okay for me to feel fine? Like, can I just enjoy is it ethical for me to like go to the bathroom and enjoy having a piss or just like to have a good day? Like it's just so jarring to me to be able to be so aware of people actively suffering on a wide scale and then just like go on with your day. And I know that sometimes you need to compartmentalize, you need to think about your own survival and happiness and hold that empathy, and that care and awareness, and take action, but also take care of yourself as well. So yeah, I think that figure, I've definitely been in that position where I'm just like in the bathroom, like I just looked at my phone and I'm just like, oh my god, like many times, to the point where I'm like, okay, no phone in the bathroom anymore. And it's like, and I think it's so funny to me. And I hope I translated this through the painting. It's so funny in like, yes, a melancholy way, how I can just be like I'm very grateful to, just be in my bathroom, relatively, safe. And then I see that like these disasters are happening. And then it's like, bam, like I perceive it. And then like this sense of panic comes like descending on me, or this awareness that like, I'll get into the fairies because they're like the symbols, but just this awareness that like things are crumbling, and then like you're just like sitting in this like placid, like eerily quiet, peaceful, like the peace you had is just now eerie, and it feels like precarious, and you're just like confronted with this inevitability, I can't say it, inevitable collapse of, you know, structures that growing up, or even like when you're older, depending on your what your experiences have allowed you to perceive, that have seemed just impenetrable and omniscient and powerful and you know, like eternal. And you're just like, okay, wow, things are tenuous, things are not guaranteed. And yeah, I think there's a lot that has made me, and I'm sure many, many others, have that sense of instability and insecurity. And yeah, so like the fairy, and I, as I mentioned, I love like pulp novels and like the covers, and I just love like things that are campy and kitschy and ridiculous, especially when they're kind of used in more serious, for the purposes of expressing something more serious. I love that contrast. I think like that absurdity and bizarreness is so it's to me it's really brutal. I think I love work that is like really brutal but also like elegant and playful. I think that both aspects magnify each other. And yeah, so that the like angel that, or not angel, the fairy guy, he's kind of like an Icarus figure, but I kind of wanted him to look like Lucifer, like beautiful blonde guy, you know. But he's like burning, and the person holding the phone is kind of looking in that direction and like kind of watching, like has that like this like stony, just placid expression. There was something I wanted to like I wanted the expression of the figure on the toilet to be like that of somebody who's probably freaked out about something, but it now is like almost doesn't have any more fuel to like be screaming and crying, and it's just like, okay. It's almost just like this like disbelief that is almost like this like dull pounding that's just like pervasive and continuing. But they're watching this, that basically that like Icarus figure is this like a representation of structures that are built on ideals that have been historically labeled as like masculine, so like domination, and in their most toxic form, so like domination, competition, that is, you know, yeah, competition, domination, what else, like conquering, yeah, and like just the sense of like greed and this desire to be on the top, and that being like the basis for all these structures, and like this, I mean, like the basis of like capitalism, basically, like more and more and more, I want to be on top, blah blah blah. Yeah, and that being an unsteady foundation, watching that foundation like crumble, and you're just like, oh my god. And then thinking about how like the wings, you know, were, I think I wrote something about this, but like thinking about how, you know, who's going to break the fall of the fairy guy, or who comprises the wings, you know, thinking about how this structure is being destroyed, but its establishment was built, or it was established because of the destruction of so many people, so many places, so many animals, plants, environments. So it was built on destruction and ends on destruction. And watching this and not, you know, no, like almost having the weight of the world on your shoulders, just knowing it's occurring, and not being able to do something on your own, and knowing that there's so many strong forces, or feeling like they're the forces that are letting this happen and have interest in this happening, and ultimately won't be as affected with the collapse as, you know, those who will break the fall, or those who comprise the wings, and feeling so helpless. And then there's the other fairy, and they're not really like, they're not really like representative of genders, but yeah, so that's more like the representation of like structures and systems built on what are considered like feminine principles, and have historically been relegated to like oh, they're like softer, less reliable, less they're the inferior of the sorts of principles that should drive whatever force or ideology, and often they're like present in indigenous cultures that are, you know, like through like colonialism or globalism or whatever, are you know, undermined and seen as like just lesser. So like stuff such as, or ideals such as like compassion, cooperation, empathy, you know, recognizing, you know, like collaborating with like us, but also with the earth. Yeah, and I think she's kind of just like sitting there on, I think she's sitting on like Nivea cream, and she's just like, oh my God, she's like waiting to like come in, and it's a little hopeful, you know, she's waiting to be like, okay, once you burn, I'm up here, and her wings are like they're flame proof, they're not gonna burn. She's not even gonna, or they're not even gonna like start a fire. And ideally there would be synthesis of the two, where it's like, and I believe that the basis of things should be, you know, compassion, collaboration, and then using like ambition and drive to put forth these ideas rooted in compassion, collaboration. Yeah. So yeah, and what was that?
No, I was going to say, I mean, I definitely feel like there is a hopefulness in it. I think that to go back briefly to Toilet Rendezvous, I think that so much of the sort of feelings that you were describing are so exemplified in that painting, you know, and even like there's such a, you frame it, there's such a political underpinning to resting on the toilet and just like being able to pee in peace, and, you know, sort of even feeling a bit of guilt or strange feelings about that. But also the fact that the person on the toilet is like wrapped in toilet paper, and like environmental implications of that existence, you know what I mean? It's like there's an interesting relationship between comfort and capitalism, and being implicated into the destructive nature of capitalism.
Absolutely, yeah. I like forgot about toilet paper. I was thinking of it being like I was thinking of it being like armor, like very flimsy armor. And also being like a mummy, like this Halloween mummy, where like you almost feel petrified, and like you almost feel like, I don't know, sort of dead, but also you have this like desire to, like the figure like feels petrified but also wants to be protected, but ultimately their protection is flimsy, their mental protection is flimsy, and it also comes from the systems that they're aware are leading to destruction and like inevitable, I said it, collapse. So yeah, I personally have encountered that, like, oh, and I've had to just like, you know, be like, it's okay to just, you know, like it's okay to just like get your like drink coffee from the coffee shop, even though you know that those cups, the wax cups, can't be recycled or something, or like it's okay to like, it's yeah, it's definitely like a moral struggle. Yeah.
And then I think, I mean, if anyone has a question, it's a good time to ask. But I think the way I wanted to, you know, sort of frame even my last question was around this idea of hopefulness, which is really felt. You know, it's like on the one hand, it's, you know, the way you describe being sort of in this cycle where you're struggling with yourself and struggling with the sort of world that you're entangled in. But at the same time, you think of I think you wrote about the landscape as something that you can sort of be hopeful through by looking at landscape and sort of engaging with landscape.
I was listening to this documentary on geology the other day, and it was like it gave this this analogy to the layers of the earth, and it was like, yeah, we're like, the earth is an egg and we're just on the shell, and the rest is this. And then I'm like, okay, you know, no matter what's happening, this is just a shell, even though, you know, I can still hold that empathy and seriousness and like passion for what's happening, but knowing that it's not permanent is very comforting to me. And observing how like the nature always balances itself out, and balance and equilibrium, no matter how evasive and elusive it seems. And so no matter how much effort it seems like we have to put in to attain it, it's gonna come one way or another. And I definitely find that comforting when thinking about injustice, because yeah, it seems like justice is like part of nature, and almost having my very strong feelings of justice, and you know, not just me, others too, kind of, you know, what's it called, like supported by nature and the natural world, and seeing how like the seemingly like perfect systems operate is just so delicious to me. Yeah, so like looking is, you know, so it's definitely an escape, and so wonderful, and really gives me a sense of scope, and challenges my perception of things. Like I go from like looking on my phone in the bathroom and like feeling terrible to like looking at a moss on some tree, and that can change things a lot. Yeah, I definitely think like even the way one enjoys nature, it's reflective of politics, and it's definitely political. I definitely think my personal history has influenced how I engage with the natural world. So when I was growing up, like I grew up in Washington, and I briefly lived in Arizona, so that landscape was very influential to me. But yeah, the sentiment among like my family was like, nature was to be seen with suspicion, and also like I always joke around to my sister that like I'm like, yeah, I guess I get it, because like they didn't come to America to like go hang out with some rocks, you know. They came here to get money. But I mean, not really. I think everyone should hang out with some rocks. But yeah, I wasn't allowed to like go into any vaguely forested area. Like if there was more than 3 trees, definitely there was a murder in there. So I was not allowed to do that. We didn't have plants around the house. We lived in the suburbs. We went to the mall if we did something fun. But I really am grateful for that, because I didn't take it for granted. And then like it was only like in my 20s where I started like hiking and stuff, because hiking was always like a white person thing. And I wasn't like, you know, I wasn't like used to seeing, like I had never just been in a forest until that point. And it was oh my God, it was like a religious experience, just like seeing, you know, like all the myriad forms nature could take. But yeah, it's been an interest. My relationship with the nature has been very interesting. And yeah, it was also like the sciences for me for a long time, where how they were presented to me was like, you need to be good in this so you can get money and not be screwed. But then so like the sciences seem like very rigid and just like not full of like, you know, joy and romance and the pleasure of the spirit and whatever. But then when I got older, I started learning about, like just on my own time, just learning about the sciences, and there would be like this fact just so plainly stated that would just have this harmony and this perfect unlikely order that was like, I would like, sometimes I really will just read like I have this book of it was like this it's like the Smithsonian book of the natural world, and I'll just like read. It has like everything, all the rocks, all the fish, everything, and it'll have the caption, and it will be like this statement that's so simply put, and then I'll be like, you know. But yeah, I think it really is so encouraging, and I'm glad I found that, and I wish that on everyone, because when things seem so like pressing and daunting and big, it gives you a sense of scale.